Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
I have really good news for you. I'm here to rob you. Oh, shoot. Sorry, that was not supposed to be at the end. Let me start over. My bad. So, Jesus died. Like all the way dead. He died all the way dead, and he did it 3 days ago. And today, this morning, he's all the way alive. He's all the way alive. If you had to write the story, if you had to write the story that the Bible has for us, the story of this day, the story of this moment, of God dying on a cross, being buried as a dead man, then walking out, how would you do it? How would you do it? How do you bring someone into that story? How would you begin to fill out the fullness of that hope? Well, for a lot of us adults, with our adult acting minds, we would probably sit down and lay out a framework that looked a lot like a textbook, which shows us how much we've actually lost our minds. Because we pretend that the best way to write the story is in a textbook, when, let's be honest, folks, raise your hand if you actually read a textbook in school. Liars! Reading the titles of the chapters does not mean you studied the textbook. All right? And sleeping on top of your textbook is not studying either. All right, let's just be honest here, okay? All right. Some of you are a little flushed because you know you just lied in church. Okay. We want to write down the greatest story in a way so that nobody would read it. And Jesus knew that. He knew it. And besides that, even if he wanted to write the textbook, which it would have been a good one, he would have realized it still doesn't do one very important thing. It doesn't capture our imagination. Textbooks are dry. They're thick, and they don't inspire like a story does, or a parable, or a narrative of someone's life and their struggle. It doesn't bring the actual information into the real world. And there's only one place that information about Jesus can live, and that's in the real world, where people have real things like death ahead of them. So Jesus does not use a textbook. He does not even use a short textbook. Instead, he enters the story because that's where we are. But there's this one thing too that I should mention about a story. Textbooks don't have any darkness. Textbooks can't bring you into fear. Textbooks can't break your heart. Textbooks do not make you want to hold your children tight. And no textbook I ever read took me to my knees in prayer. But this story does. This story does. And actually, St. Paul talks about this in his letter to the Corinthians. He writes, "In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." In other words, they didn't have that story to bring light into their darkness. And so this world just found a way to live in the darkness, to live without love, to live without hope, to live without joy, to just be content. To make do with what you have, to accept the suffering you have received as par for the course, and to live with it. Friends, the world has convinced us that it's okay to live in darkness. Check out this picture. The world has convinced you it's okay to live in that tomb with the stone in place. But the entirety of the story of Jesus is God coming to move the stone aside. It's God coming to meet you in your darkness. It's God coming to find you locked in your darkness, suffering from despair, anxiety, depression, anger, and fear. He's coming to find you in the tomb. Because the story he has written is not a textbook, but it's an adventure. It's an adventure where God himself enters with you into your suffering. Which is why St. Paul doesn't stop there. He doesn't leave us in the darkness. He continues, he writes, "For God, the God who said in the very beginning, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' that God has shone into our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." Friends, God's answer to all of our struggles, God's answer to the pain that dwells in your heart, isn't to give you a simple formula in a textbook. Instead, he sends his Easter Messiah that you may see the face of God. Because he knows that is the only thing that will bring you light. Friends, it's when we see the face of our Easter King. It's when Jesus walks out and he has to twice say to Mary Magdalene, twice say to her, "It's me, why are you crying?" Right? And then as he speaks her name, the face of God is able even to remove that darkness. In fact, I get goosebumps every time I read it. Every single time I gotta do like a little dance to shake them off. Because that's how Jesus greets you. It's how he even greets me. It's in the middle of my darkness when I'm focused on everything I have lost. When I'm focused on the failures of my life, the tragedy of my sins, the brokenness of my thoughts and my words, it's in those moments when I'm the most broken that Jesus says, "Brian, and I'm not alone." Jesus speaks your name that you may have his life. The problem with Easter, friends, is that we take that away. We take away that individual nature, and we do it for good reason, because when it becomes that personal, friends, it's a little uncomfortable. And so we like to paint Easter with these broad brushstrokes. It's Jesus dying on a cross somewhere and rising from a tomb that we've never seen in a place we've never been. And he did it for things like sin and death. But in case you didn't know, there is no such thing as generic death. Like it doesn't exist. There's no generic brand on the shelf next to the Pepsi. Death always belongs to someone. Maybe you live feeling that. Maybe you know all too well that death is intimate. It is not generic. That death brings with it a deep darkness and a sadness that we have to live with, that we can't get away from. And no matter how many times the world throws solutions our way, solution after solution fails. And it falls short. And that darkness we found ourselves in is even more deep because how we've tried to ignore it has only made it worse. And so maybe we've lost a friend or a parent. Maybe it's a husband or a wife. Maybe it's a son or a daughter. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's the sickness. Maybe it's the idle Tuesday afternoon in a vehicle accident and you find yourself with a gaping hole, with darkness. Friends, there's only one way. There's only one way out of darkness. There's only one way to heal that brokenness. There's only one way, and that name belongs to Jesus, and that's because he sought you out in your brokenness. You see, the whole story of Jesus is the story of God's darkest moment. God's absolute darkest moment. His moment of excruciating pain. His moment of complete condemnation, rejection. All of that was for one purpose. So that God's darkest moment could be your greatest light. Because in his darkest moment, he took your darkness and gave you his light. I started this morning by saying I'm here to rob you, and I am. But I'm too late. I'm too late. Because you have already been robbed. The darkness you want to carry with you, the sins that you want to find a way to make up for, the mistakes, the wrong words, the failures, the letdowns, all of that you thought was yours, all of your sin and your brokenness that you thought belonged to you, check it out, friends, it's gone. It's gone. Jesus has robbed you blind. None of it belongs to you any longer. There is no need for you to keep pretending that it still belongs to you. Everybody knows Jesus took it. He took it all. There is no darkness left for you to contend with. There is no despair left for you to find a way out of. There is no place left that is dark that you will ever be alone, because Jesus has joined his life to yours. Which means that every single dark moment you face, every hard life situation you must go through, there is no darkness there, friends. There is no darkness. Because the light of the world has taken it from you. No matter where you go, no matter what you face, the light of the world, Jesus, your Easter King, is with you. You've been robbed, but it's the best heist the world has ever seen. We pray.